My fellow Amazonians, this is Dr. Cho Ayaba. Good morning to everyone. I scheduled a public outing yesterday to speak to you people on the issue of the Supreme General of the ADF, General Efang. But there were still some lingering questions which I had to answer yesterday before making a public statement. And I think that is clarified now. General Efang is one of the finest nationalists that Amazonia will ever have. It's the guy that has given us a great sense of hope through his organization, his great sense of nationalism, colorful. He is the one who inspired all barracks in Amazonia to arm. He is the one who saw arming ourselves as very important in our liberation and our protection. And that inspired other barracks to follow. He was the source of a lot of things. 1st of October, big celebrations that inspired our people, the foundation of our community schools, different policies like taxation. And they call him a Zemo. I'm not quite sure what the soldiers mean by this. But he's a wonderful gentleman. And I just wanted to take a few moments to make some public clarification so that I know that a lot of you have a lot of questions. How could it happen? And why it happened? I know some are extremely very happy. But this is war. And anything can happen. We are operating within a very difficult space. And we have mastered our terrain. We have been able to build alert systems, defenses that prevent things like this from happening. General Efang has been attacked by the enemy more than 100 times. And he has been able to survive all of those attacks. As a leader, I knew that one day they will get lucky. They just need one luck. And they had their luck the other day. So my office was notified by the commander of Momo that his location had been surrounded. You may ask, how could they even gain access to? We control a vast zone. And so we don't have like a up station where it's like a fortress where the enemy has barricaded themselves inside and then they move in armor cars, helicopters, and maybe a plethora of forces. We don't operate that way. So if you see the enemy has decided to retreat like in Mezam, up station is because they find it like a fortress, difficult to penetrate. So, and when they move into the city, they move with armor cars. They had different intelligence networks to protect their own leaders. We don't have fortresses. We operate from inside. We don't have zones to retreat to like outside, like other liberation struggles. But we've built a very strong network of defenses and intelligence outposts to be able to monitor enemy movements and take quick actions just in case. The enemy knows where our commanders are. The problem has been to penetrate those places. That's why when we've always talked about blacklegs and spies, it's a serious issue. So I was notified that the Supreme General's location had been surrounded. And the gunfire that was emanating from there was kind of the loudest that our forces have ever gotten. So we tried to move forces to open a corridor. It was not easy to even approach. The forces that were with him, that provide a kind of security, I don't want to go into details, had been bypassed because the enemy was able to approach his location with the help of the fund or chief of EY, and we have another information that the son was part of the military. I've spoken to this particular chief. He's been a pro-Ambazonian chief. But we suspect that because of the pressure of the traitors and collaborators who are outside, they mobilized money to manipulate him. And because we were close with him, he basically was part and parcel of the community that our forces were in. And he was able to move with the enemy forces, bypassing the network of checkpoints that we had put around the Supreme General. And they surprised the Supreme right in the house, in the room. And they themselves were really scared. This briefing I'm giving you, I got it directly from the Supreme. So one of them picked up a shoe and tried to drop on him to find out if he was sleeping, because it was already morning. And he immediately went for his rifle and fought out from the room. And when he entered the living room, he used the grenade to be able to disperse the enemy, and then got out of the entire space. About an hour later, I got notified that they had rang his phone, and it was answered by an element of the B. By then, we already knew that he had been killed. About 30 minutes later, another call came in that a helicopter was coming in. So at that moment also, I have notified the executive and notified the relevant stakeholders of the AGOC that expect that the Supreme General has been killed. The bodyguards, we could not get anybody. Later on, we got a guard who said the Supreme fought his way out. So there was a bit of hope, but there was no contact. Almost 3 hours later, we got one of the soldiers who was with him, was also wounded. And so he said he cannot confirm if the Supreme escaped that attack, but there is hope because he fought himself out of that space. 5 hours later, we now got notification that he is somewhere. There was still no contact. We sent a contingent of forces and they were able to confirm. And then we spoke to him on phone, and then later I spoke to him on video. He was wounded, and I think in the past days I have briefed the commanders, I've briefed the executive, I've briefed the base of the AGOC. He was really wounded, but was okay. So we began treatment and we realized we needed specialist treatment. We had to move him from Momo to Mezam, into Mezam, where we got preliminary treatment and moved him into a secure location. And there we got some treatment also, and he was okay. So it was not like his life was threatened, but the wounds were not really looking good. And if not, then that could lead to infection and even death. A few days ago, we moved him again. We needed to take him back into a specialist place. He needed blood, he needed operation. All those things were done. Somehow the enemy got information. So as we were taking him into the hospital again for treatment, the enemy attacked. We moved him up into a particular area and we notified forces in Bui, notified forces in Mezam. You know, I notify also forces in Boyo. They all worked together, and the forces nearby, they got the Supreme into a barrack. The next morning, the day he was kidnapped by the enemy, the forces moved him back into the hospital. I just got information that the hospital staffs have been arrested. So I first thought they were arrested by the enemy forces. Then I was notified they were arrested by Amazonian forces, making sure the Supreme was treated. So they treated him and they were supposed to move him into a particular area before we could get him out of the hospital. The enemy swam in. It's very difficult to allow the enemy to get to the level they got with the Supreme, but it's the nature of the liberation struggle. But I just want to assure each and every one of you that in the mechanics of leadership, there are many things I will not go into. In the mechanics of leadership, you factor these scenarios every day. Every day. I called a meeting, I think 2 weeks ago. I asked the defense to get into a meeting with me to look at the vulnerabilities around the Supreme, other generals, top generals. And that is I have argued this with you people many times, why we need to mobilize resources, control states. I talked to you about the necessity to establish hospitals in safe states where you can get forces treated when they are wounded. In war, forces are treated by sometimes institutions that are established to cater for forces or for the wounded in times of war. In the Amazonian situation, you realize it was the Medicine Sans Frontier that was kicked out because the enemy knows we will have wounded. They, as an established functional state, have military hospitals that are in safe zones. They can treat their wounded. They can evacuate their wounded also into their own territory. So these are the things that we lack, and I have made the argument we must move to the level where we control states within which we can train, we can operate hospitals, and we can do a lot of things without the threat from the enemy, because we don't have a fallback like the Rwandans had in Uganda or the Ugandans had in Tanzania. We don't have that kind of a fallback. We operate from inside. So we still have these vulnerabilities, and we must overcome them. We have, in the past days, been able to make an assessment of our forces, and I am able to inform you that the strength of our forces is not weakened. They have lost their leader, their symbol, their father, but we know he's in the hands of the enemy. We have notified the international community. We have been able to, you've watched some videos, I haven't watched most of those things, but he's in the hands of the enemy. What I want to tell Ambazonians is that the resistance will intensify. We authorized forces the other night to take certain actions. You must have heard in Bamenda, actions were launched against enemy targets. We must have killed more than 7 enemy forces in an IED attack on the armor cars. They ordered the chief of EY to surrender himself to the forces. He has surrendered himself to the enemy forces. We know he is up stationed in Bamenda. We will track him. The village of EY will not exist on the map of Ambazonia. I will not talk about many other actions that we will take, but we will take action. And we will continue to do the things that we have been doing. The Supreme General will remain the Supreme General. He will not be replaced. Wherever he is, he will remain the Supreme General of the Ambazonian Defense Forces and the inspiration of our nationalism. What I also want to tell you is this. In 2000, I think that was 2011, the leader of the revolutionary movement of Colombia, the FARC, Afonso Cano, he was killed in an airstrike. At that particular moment when he was killed, the Colombian rebels were having negotiations with the Colombian government in Cuba. one of the sessions, the Colombian team was notified that their leader had been killed. I had a meeting with one of the FARC commanders who was in the jungle for 20 years. She's now a senator in the Colombian parliament. She was part of the negotiation. I asked her, what did you do? How did you feel? And how did you people react? She said to me it was so difficult because their leader was a very charismatic leader, was an emblematic figure. And it was so hard to believe that at the same time when they were having negotiations, the Colombian government bombed their headquarters in the jungle and then sent special forces that killed him. But one thing she said to me was they did not walk out of the discussions. 6 years later, the Colombian government signed a peace agreement with the FARC. I just want to let you know that these things happen in war. There is precedence. In May of, I think 2007, the East Timorese separatist leader, Gusmao Jose, Gusmao, was arrested in a tunnel near Dili by Indonesian special forces. In May of 1993, he was tried and sentenced to life imprisonment. He became president of East Timor. His forces had nearly been wiped out. They were pushed into their mountain hideouts. When a new president came into Indonesia, he realized they had no justification for the continuous occupation of East Timor, and that keeping their leader, continuous killing of East Timorese, was not going to make Indonesia more powerful. On the day that he was being moved from prison into house arrest for negotiations with the Indonesian government, a couple of his supporters were singing and praying. He raised his right fist in defiance. We are aware that on August 5th, 1962, Nelson Mandela was captured and he was later tried and sentenced to life imprisonment. He spent 27 years in jail. Like Gusmao of East Timor, he was also moved from jail into a separate location to negotiate the surrender of the enemy. And the enemy surrendered. In 1979, the minority Tutsis in Rwanda, supported by President Museveni of Uganda, formed the Rwandan Patriotic Front political party in exile and the Rwandan Patriotic Army. Fred Ruwagema became the chairman of both arms. In their first attempt to invade Rwanda from Uganda, Fred Ruwagema was killed. Present President of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, became the commander of the Rwandan Patriotic Army. He fought hard. He defeated the Habyarimana government, and he has been ruling Rwanda ever since. Amazonian situation may not be different, but one thing I can tell each and every one of you is that we have risen. And the tenacity of our forces, the bravery of our forces is unrivaled. What we sometimes question is if some of you Ambazonians have that kind of tenacity. The East Timorese fought for 24 years. They never blinked. The Palestinians have been fighting for 75 years. Even though you can look that Gaza has been flattened, you don't see them on the streets blaming Palestinian resistance fighters. Even when Hamas moved into Israel and committed all the kinds of crimes that they did, South Africa is still able to file a case in the ICJ against Israel. The Eritreans fought so hard, lost so many commanders. The main commander of the South Sudanese, John Garang, was killed in a helicopter crash. South Sudan is today independent. For all those who rejoice for the enemy, let this history be a lesson to you. For each and every one of you who thinks, who contemplates that one day status quo ante will be restored, where Cameroon will take over Ambazonia. You are having a nightmare and not a dream. Ambazonia has risen. It will bury Cameroon in the cemetery of occupiers. And we will rise up to take over control of the land that was bestowed to us by our Creator and nature. We will stumble, we will fall, but we will rise. General Ivo was killed. General Efang took over to build a force that became the pride of the Ambazonian people. General Efang was kidnapped by Nambere and others, subjected to torture. 60% of our materials were seized. He was later attacked in Bui. More than 30 of our finest men were buried alive. All of our materials were seized. We had less than 10 men in the barrack with 10 rifles. We rebelled and showed you on every October the metal, the kind of people we are. We have lost big generals on the ground. In Lebialem, in Fako, in Bui, in Mezam, we have lost Ambazonian generals. Yet, in the barracks in Ambazonia, other generals are emerging to continue the journey to make sure we are free. And we are free. The mental liberation we have achieved is important for our stability. Our country looks like a space in the 15th century. No roads, no hospitals, no electricity, no water. These things, their absence is not because of the war. Their absence is because of the occupation. Ambazonians have fled Ambazonia for the past 60 years, not because of the war in the past 7 years, because of the occupation. Economic refugees, educational refugees, political refugees, security refugees. The occupation is the curse that has been responsible for the pain and suffering. The resistance is the antidote. One of my top advisors wrote yesterday, and this is what I want to leave with you today. We have to be prepared to take the roads we have never taken before. We have to be prepared for the unexpected. the impossible and the unimaginable. That is what it takes to move from a state of occupation and total dependency to a state of freedom, independence, and ownership of your destiny. God bless you all, and God protect our forces and the Supreme Leader of the Amazonian Defense Forces.